John Parker was a man of humble beginnings. Born and raised in a small town in Ohio, he had always been the type of person who valued honesty, loyalty, and hard work above all else. His parents were factory workers who had instilled in him the importance of integrity. John had carried those values with him throughout his life, earning a reputation as a dependable, kind-hearted man who would do anything for those he loved. At 38, John had built a comfortable life for himself. He worked as an electrical engineer for a large manufacturing company in the Midwest, where his dedication and problem-solving skills had earned him respect and steady promotions. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he had a good job, a nice home in the suburbs, and enough savings to feel secure. For John, his greatest achievement wasn't his career or his home. It was his marriage to Emily. Emily, a year younger than John, had grown up in a slightly more privileged environment. She was from a well-off family in a larger city where she had been the apple of her parents' eye. Emily had always been beautiful, with her striking blue eyes, flowing blonde hair, and an air of sophistication that drew people to her effortlessly. She had met John during college, where they had both studied, he in engineering and she in business management. Their romance had blossomed quickly, and they married soon after graduation. For the first few years, their marriage had been everything John had hoped for. Emily had been a loving wife, and they had shared dreams of starting a family, traveling, and building a life together. However, things had begun to change after Emily got a job at a prominent marketing firm in the city. Her career had taken off, and with it, her priorities seemed to shift. She started spending long hours at the office, attending work-related events, and traveling frequently. At first, John had been proud of her success, but over time, he couldn't help but notice the growing distance between them. Emily's boss, Mark Caldwell, was a powerful and charismatic man in his early 50s. He had built the marketing firm from the ground up and was known for his sharp business acumen and ability to close deals. Mark was married but had a reputation for being a bit of a womanizer. He often flirted with the younger women at the office, and rumors of his affairs circulated regularly. John had met Mark a few times at company functions, and while he had always been polite, John couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about him. The changes in Emily had been gradual at first: late nights at the office, a new wardrobe, and an increased interest in her appearance. She had become more secretive with her phone and less engaged in their conversations. John, ever the trusting husband, had initially brushed these things off. He had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially Emily, whom he had loved so deeply. But as the months passed, the nagging doubts grew stronger. One evening, John was waiting for Emily to return home from work. It was already past 9 p.m., and she hadn't called or texted to say she'd be late. He tried calling her, but his calls went straight to voicemail. Anxiety gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself that she was probably busy with work. After all, Emily had always been ambitious, and her career was important to her. Yet, as he sat alone in their living room, the silence of the house seemed to amplify his fears. Emily finally came home around midnight, looking more disheveled than usual. Her eyes were red, and she seemed distracted. John noticed the faint scent of alcohol and something else, maybe cologne, that wasn't his. He didn't say anything, hoping she would explain on her own, but she didn't. Instead, she muttered a quick good night and went straight to bed. That night, as John lay awake next to her, he couldn't ignore the unease that had settled in his chest. He had never been the jealous type, but something was clearly wrong. Emily had become a stranger to him, and it terrified him. He didn't want to confront her without proof, but how could he get proof without betraying the trust he had always valued? The very thought of snooping through her things made him sick, but so did the idea of being lied to by the woman he loved. The turning point came a few days later when John was cleaning up after dinner. Emily had been particularly cold that evening, barely speaking to him and disappearing into the study as soon as they finished eating. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter, something she rarely did anymore. It buzzed with a notification, catching John's attention. He hesitated, but the gnawing doubt in his mind pushed him to take a look. The message was from Mark Caldwell. "Can't wait for our trip next week. It's going to be unforgettable. Remember, don't say a word to John. He doesn't need to know." John's heart sank as he read the message. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the conversation. It was clear that Emily and Mark had been seeing each other for months. There were messages filled with flirtation, innuendos, and plans for secret meetings. John's worst fears were confirmed. Emily was having an affair with her boss. He felt a wave of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, but above all, a deep, itching sorrow. How could she do this to him? After everything they had been through, after all the love and trust he had given her, how could she so casually destroy their marriage? John stood there in the kitchen, staring at the screen, unable to process what he had just discovered. When Emily came back into the kitchen, she noticed the look on John's face. "What's wrong?" she asked, but her tone was indifferent, as if she already knew what he had found. John didn't respond at first. He just handed her the phone, his eyes filled with hurt. Emily glanced at the screen, and for a moment, a flicker of guilt crossed her face. But it quickly vanished, replaced by a cold, defiant expression. "You shouldn't be going through my phone, John," she said, her voice sharp. "How long has this been going on?" John finally asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Emily sighed, as if this conversation was a burden she didn't want to deal with. "A few months," she admitted. "But it's not what you think. Mark and I, we have a connection, something that's been missing between us for a long time." John felt a pang of guilt, wondering if he had somehow pushed her into this affair by not being enough for her. But that guilt was quickly overtaken by anger. "You could have talked to me, Emily. We could have worked through this together. But you chose to lie and cheat instead." Emily crossed her arms, her demeanor more defiant than apologetic. "You don't understand, John. My life has changed, and so have I. You've been stuck in the same routine for years, but I've outgrown that. I need more than what you can offer." John was stunned. This was not the woman he had married. The Emily he knew would never have been so callous, so dismissive of their relationship. He realized then that he had lost her long before he had even known it. The woman standing before him was a stranger, someone who had made her choice long ago. "What about us? What about our marriage?" John asked, his voice choked with emotion. Emily shrugged. "I don't see why we can't keep things as they are. You don't have to know what I do when I'm not here. We can still be together, but I need my freedom." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was proposing an open marriage, something he could never agree to. "That's not a marriage, Emily. That's not what I signed up for." She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. "You're so old-fashioned, John. Times have changed. People aren't meant to be tied down to one person forever. I'm going on vacation with Mark next week, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." With those words, Emily turned and walked out of the room, leaving John standing there, utterly shattered. He felt like his world had just crumbled around him. The woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and she didn't even seem to care. For a moment he considered confronting Mark, but what good would it do? The damage was done. That night, John couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what had gone wrong, of all the moments he had missed the signs. He replayed their entire relationship in his head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things had started to fall apart. But it was like trying to catch water in his hands. No matter how hard he tried, it slipped through his fingers. The next morning, John woke up with a heavy heart, but also with a newfound determination. He realized that he couldn't let Emily's betrayal destroy him. He had to take control of the situation to protect himself and his dignity. If Emily wanted to live her life on her own terms, then so be it. But he wouldn't be a passive victim in this story. John Parker's life had been turned upside down after discovering his wife Emily's affair. The man he had always been, the one who valued loyalty and honesty, had been deeply wounded. But beneath the pain, a quiet resolve began to take root. Emily had shown her true colors, and now it was time for John to respond, not with anger or despair, but with a calculated, deliberate plan to reclaim his life. John was a thoughtful man by nature. He wasn't prone to impulsive decisions, and even now, he knew he needed to think carefully about his next steps. After the gut-wrenching conversation with Emily, he spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection. He didn't argue with her or plead for her to stay. Instead, he observed, listened, and considered his options. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but he knew that reacting out of pure emotion would only lead to more heartache. In those few days, Emily seemed to grow even bolder in her actions. She no longer hid her communications with Mark Caldwell and openly discussed her upcoming vacation with him, as if John's feelings were of no consequence. John's heart ached, but his mind was already working on a plan. He realized that Emily had no intention of ending her affair or salvaging their marriage. She had made her choice, and now he had to make his. During this time, John found solace in the most unexpected place: his colleague Lisa Bennett. Lisa was a woman in her mid-30s with dark brown hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders and warm hazel eyes that radiated kindness. She was a systems analyst at the same manufacturing company where John worked, and they had known each other for several years. Though they had always been friendly, their relationship had never ventured beyond the bounds of professional camaraderie. Lisa was a single mother, raising her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, on her own after a difficult divorce. She had faced her own share of challenges and heartbreak, but she carried herself with a quiet strength that John had always admired. Over the years, they had occasionally shared lunch or a cup of coffee at work, discussing their projects, their lives, and sometimes even their struggles. John had always appreciated her practical advice and the way she seemed to understand people so well. After learning of Emily's infidelity, John had found himself confiding in Lisa more than he had with anyone else. He hadn't intended to, but one day at work, when she had noticed the strain on his face and asked if everything was okay, the dam had broken. He had told her everything: the late nights, the affair, Emily's coldness, and the crushing discovery of the text messages. Lisa had listened with compassion, offering a comforting presence without judgment. As the days passed, Lisa became a source of strength for John. She didn't try to tell him what to do or how to feel. She simply listened, offering support and understanding. John found himself looking forward to their conversations, finding in them a refuge from the turmoil at home. It wasn't long before he realized that he was developing feelings for her, feelings that were different from anything he had experienced before. Lisa was different from Emily in every way. Where Emily had become distant and self-centered, Lisa was warm and empathetic. Where Emily had sought out excitement and validation from others, Lisa was content with the simple pleasures of life, spending time with her daughter, enjoying a good book, or having a meaningful conversation. John found himself drawn to her in a way that was both comforting and exhilarating. She was the kind of woman he had always hoped to find: genuine, caring, and strong. One evening, after another long day at work, John found himself lingering in the office with Lisa after most of their colleagues had gone home. They sat together in the break room, the hum of the vending machines filling the silence as they sipped their coffee. "John," Lisa began, her voice gentle yet concerned, "I know you're going through a lot right now, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. But I also want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You deserve better than what Emily's putting you through." John looked at her, his heart heavy with gratitude. "I know, Lisa, and I'm trying to figure out how to move forward. It's just hard. I never imagined things would turn out this way." Lisa reached out and placed her hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it sent a wave of warmth through John. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said softly. "You have people who care about you, people who want to see you happy." As he looked into her eyes, John felt a sense of clarity. He knew that he couldn't continue living in the limbo that Emily had created. He needed to take control of his life again, to build something new and meaningful away from the betrayal and pain that had consumed him. And he realized that he wanted Lisa to be a part of that new life. It was in that moment that John made a decision. He would no longer be a passive victim of Emily's betrayal. He would reclaim his life, his dignity, and his happiness. And he knew exactly how to start. The next day, while Emily was busy preparing for her upcoming vacation with Mark, John set his plan into motion. He had already discussed the possibility of Lisa moving in with him if things ever reached a breaking point with Emily, and now it was time to make that a reality. Lisa was hesitant at first, not wanting to complicate things further, but she also recognized the depth of John's pain and the need for him to reclaim his space and his life. They agreed that she and Sophie would move in temporarily while John sorted out the situation with Emily. John knew it was a bold move, but he was tired of being the one who was always accommodating, always sacrificing. This time, he would put himself first. Over the next few days, while Emily was away, John and Lisa worked together to make the necessary changes. John packed up all of Emily's belongings from the master bedroom, carefully placing them in boxes and storing them in the basement. It was a bittersweet task, as each item he packed away reminded him of the love they had once shared, but it also felt like a cleansing. a way to remove the lingering shadows of a relationship that had long since died. Lisa's presence in the house was a breath of fresh air. She brought a warmth and positivity that had been missing for so long. She and Sophie quickly made themselves at home, transforming the once cold and empty spaces into lively, welcoming areas filled with laughter and light. Sophie, with her boundless energy and curiosity, was a joyful presence, reminding John of the simple pleasures in life that he had lost sight of during his troubled marriage. As they settled into their new living arrangement, John and Lisa grew closer. They spent evenings talking late into the night, sharing their hopes, fears, and dreams. John found himself opening up to Lisa in ways he never had with Emily. There was no pretense, no need to impress or hide anything. With Lisa, he could be his true self, and that was a gift he hadn't realized he had been missing. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, John and Lisa sat on the couch, a glass of wine in each of their hands. The soft glow of the fireplace bathed the room in a warm light, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of the logs burning. "Thank you for being here," John said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." Lisa smiled and leaned in closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, John. I'm just glad I could help. You deserve to be happy, and I'm honored that you've allowed me to be a part of your life." John looked down at her, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace. The pain of Emily's betrayal was still there, but it was no longer the all-consuming force it had been. He was healing, slowly but surely, and Lisa was a big part of that. As they sat there together, the world outside their little bubble seemed to fade away. John realized that he had found something far more valuable than what he had lost. He had found a partner who truly understood him, who cared for him deeply, and who wanted to build a future with him. But the peace they had found was soon to be tested. The day of Emily's return was fast approaching, and John knew that the confrontation that awaited him would be anything but easy. He had prepared himself as best as he could, but there was still an underlying tension, a sense of dread that gnawed at him. When the day finally arrived, John felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. He knew that Emily would not react well to the changes he had made, and he braced himself for the storm that was sure to follow. Emily arrived home in the late afternoon, her usual air of confidence and self-assurance on full display as she pulled into the driveway. John watched from the window as she stepped out of her car, her suitcase in hand, completely unaware of the transformation that had taken place in her absence. As Emily walked through the front door, she was greeted by the sight of Lisa and Sophie in the living room, playing a game together. The warm, cheerful atmosphere was a stark contrast to the tension and coldness that had filled the house before she left. Emily froze in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes darting between John, Lisa, and Sophie. The scene before her was something she hadn't expected, a warm, inviting home filled with the kind of life and joy that had been absent for so long. But instead of bringing her comfort, it filled her with an icy rage. "What's going on here?" Emily demanded, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. Lisa quickly stood up, guiding Sophie out of the room with a gentle smile. "Let's go upstairs and play in your room for a while, okay?" she whispered to Sophie, who nodded and followed her mother up the stairs without a word, sensing the tension in the air. John watched them go, grateful for Lisa's tact and composure. Once they were out of sight, he turned back to Emily, who was still standing by the door, her suitcase now dropped to the floor. "I think you know exactly what's going on," John replied calmly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. Emily's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists. "What the hell is she doing in our house? And who gave you the right to move my things?" John took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. He had anticipated this reaction, had played it out in his mind over and over again in the days leading up to her return. But now that the moment was here, the reality of it felt much heavier than he had expected. "This isn't your house anymore, Emily," John said firmly. "You made your choice when you decided to go off with Mark. You've been clear about what you want. And now I'm making my choice." Emily's face twisted with anger, her cheeks flushing red as she stepped closer, her voice rising. "You don't get to make that decision. This is still my house, and I'm still your wife." John shook his head, his expression remaining calm but resolute. "No, Emily, you stopped being my wife the moment you decided our marriage wasn't enough for you. You chose to have an affair, to lie to me, and to disrespect everything we built together. I deserve better than that. I deserve to be happy." The words hit Emily like a slap to the face. For a moment, she was stunned into silence. The confidence she had worn so proudly seemed to falter, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But it didn't last long. Her anger returned, fueled by the realization that she no longer had control over the situation. "You think you can just replace me with her?" Emily spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can throw away everything we had and move on with some cheap replacement?" John felt a pang of hurt at her words, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he looked her in the eyes, his gaze unwavering. "Lisa is not a replacement, Emily. She's someone who cares about me, who respects me, and who has been there for me when you weren't. She's the kind of person I should have been with all along, someone who actually values what it means to be in a relationship." Emily's expression twisted into a sneer. "And you think she's going to be any different? She's just using you, John. She'll get bored of you just like I did. You're too simple, too predictable." The words stung, but John knew they were born out of Emily's desperation to hurt him, to claw back some semblance of control. He refused to let her succeed. "Maybe she will, maybe she won't," John replied, his voice calm. "But I'd rather take that chance than stay in a marriage where I'm treated like an afterthought." Emily's eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too. Fear. She had always been the one in control, the one calling the shots, and now that power was slipping away from her. "You can't just kick me out," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I'll sue you for everything you have. You'll regret this, John." John took a step closer, his expression unyielding. "You can try, Emily, but let me be clear. This is over. I've already filed for divorce, and I've spoken to a lawyer. You won't get to take everything from me just because you're angry that I'm moving on. And as for the house, you're welcome to stay, but only in the basement. My things are up here now, and Lisa and Sophie will be staying with me." Emily's face contorted with fury. "You bastard," she shouted, her voice echoing through the house. "You think you can just replace me and go on living your happy little life like nothing ever happened?" John stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. "No, Emily, I'm not replacing you. I'm moving forward. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." For a moment, Emily just stood there, her chest heaving with anger, her mind racing for a way to regain control. But the more she looked at John, the more she realized that the man standing before her wasn't the same man she had manipulated for so long. He was stronger now, more determined. He wasn't going to be swayed by her threats or her anger, and that realization terrified her. "You'll regret this, John," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. "I'll make sure of it." John simply shook his head. "I don't think I will, Emily. I think this is the best decision I've ever made." Emily stared at him, her eyes burning with hatred, but there was nothing more she could say. The power she had wielded over John for so long was gone, and all she was left with was the bitter reality of her own choices. With a final furious glare, Emily turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the room, but instead of filling it with tension, it brought a sense of relief, a finality that John had been waiting for. John stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. The confrontation had been intense, but it was over now. The weight of the past months began to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a new sense of freedom. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. After a few moments, Lisa came back down the stairs, her expression cautious but concerned. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. John turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It will be," he replied. "It will be." Lisa walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said softly, "but I'm proud of you, John. You stood up for yourself." John looked into her eyes, feeling a warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Lisa, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." Lisa smiled, her eyes shining with affection. "You would have figured it out. You're stronger than you realize." John pulled her into a hug, holding her close as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The confrontation with Emily had been the culmination of months of pain and uncertainty, but now it was over. He was free to start over, to build a life that was truly his own. As they stood there together, John realized that he wasn't just moving on from Emily. He was moving forward with someone who truly cared about him, who valued him for who he was. And that was something he hadn't had in a long time. Over the next few weeks, the house slowly transformed into a place of comfort and joy. Lisa and Sophie settled in, filling the space with warmth and laughter. The shadows that Emily had left behind began to fade, replaced by the light of a new beginning. John and Lisa took things slowly, allowing their relationship to develop naturally. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever, just two people finding solace and happiness in each other's company. They spent their days working side by side, and their evenings were filled with simple pleasures. Cooking dinner together, watching movies with Sophie, and talking late into the night. As the weeks turned into months, John found himself healing in ways he hadn't expected. The pain of Emily's betrayal was still there, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far he had come, of the strength he had found within himself to move on. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth. Emily, despite her initial threats, had little ground to stand on. John's lawyer had ensured that he was protected, and in the end, the settlement was fair. Emily walked away with her share, but the house remained John's, and he was finally able to close that chapter of his life. The day the divorce was finalized, John felt a profound sense of relief. He was free from the pain, the lies, and the constant uncertainty. He was finally able to look to the future with hope instead of fear. One evening, after the papers were signed and the dust had settled, John and Lisa sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. Sophie was inside playing with her toys, and the house was filled with the peaceful silence of a day well spent. "I never thought I'd be here," John said quietly, his eyes fixed on the fading light. "I never thought I'd be able to move on from everything that happened.